It's happened.
That has happened.
If someone asked you how to become a Christian, would you explain grace and faith? Or would you just use a phrase like, have you asked Jesus into your heart? And today we want to start a mini-series on Curious Faith called Lost in Translation, where we are exploring what these curious Christian words and phrases are all about that we use often, and everybody in the church probably just assumes that everybody else knows what we're talking about. And so welcome to this Curious Faith Lost in Translation podcast, where faith isn't the absence of questions, and we don't assume that everybody knows what we're talking about. So we want to answer these things thoughtfully and biblically. And so my name is Ryan Johnson. I have two curious companions for today's episode, Dakota Parrish and Dwayne Thomas. How are y'all doing?
Good.
Still good. All right, good. And so, Dwayne, why don't you give us the words and phrases that we're going to be discussing today?
Today we're going to look at grace, faith, ask Jesus into your heart, and give your life to Christ, what these mean.
All right. So these lost in translation phrases all kind of relate to what does it actually mean to become a Christian. And so kudos to Dakota for coming up with the idea of this series where we just ask, what do these words mean? We just kind of assume everybody knows what we're talking about when we use these words and phrases in the church, but do they actually know what we're talking about? And I think Dakota gets that from working with younger generations, and he's mentioned that younger generations seem to be very literal, and so we don't need to assume that they know what we're talking about when we use these words. So let's start off with the words and defining the words without using the words in the definition. So when we talk about grace, of course, we're going to go with the acronym, God's riches at Christ's expense. And that acronym has some very important components to it. So God's riches, his unmerited favor, his blessing, his attitude of kind of positive relationship that is extended to us at the expense of Christ who died on the cross. I do think that's a really good definition of grace because it includes those important components of God blessing us, but then it coming at the expense of Christ's blood. And so when we talk about grace, that's in terms of salvation. That's in terms of conversion. But to limit the definition of grace just to the aspect of conversion is actually to miss out on something else that is really important. The salvation by grace comes from places like Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. For it's by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not of yourselves. It's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one should boast. So this idea that grace is not earned is really important when we are talking about a biblical understanding of the gospel. However, there's another definition of grace, which is almost like this spiritual momentum. It's the power of God at work in us. It's the unleashing of grace into our lives, so that we actually have this propelling towards obedience. And Paul uses this when he talks about it's the grace of God that I am what I am, and his grace towards me will not be in vain. So he is talking about unmerited favor there, but it's also this idea that he's done a work in me, and as a response to that work, I'm responding to that grace, and that grace is being poured out and unleashed inside of me, and I'm taking further and further steps of obedience. And of course, when we talk about faith, we're talking about trusting in an object outside of ourselves. So I have faith in this chair that it's going to hold me up. In fact, there's actually three Latin terms that describe the different levels of belief, right? And so the first Latin term is this Latin term that just means knowledge, right? So just basic information. So that information is relayed to me, and I have it in my head. So I have knowledge, but that's not faith yet. It's a component of faith, because in order to have faith, I've got to know about the object. Well, the next level is kind of assent or affirmation. Like I'm saying, yes, I believe that. So now I'm going from just the information that I've been given to now the belief that this is true. But that's still not faith. And you say, well, Ryan, how's that not faith? Well, according to James chapter 2, demons have that kind of knowledge, right? They have knowledge of who God is, and they believe it to be true, but they lack the third level, which is trust. And that's why we say faith is trust, and trust specifically in the finished work of Jesus as our Savior and our substitute for our sins. So grace and faith, two very, very important terms in the Christian life. So what would you guys add to that?
I just want to say that, like, when it comes to faith, Ray Comfort has a analogy about it that he uses. He's like, you may say that you have faith that this parachute's going to work, but until you put the parachute on your back and jump out of the airplane, you don't really have trust in that parachute. You can say it all day long.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
That's why we have hard times.
Mm.
Coming from Little House on the Prairie. No, the two things that I had was there is mercy, which is not on this episode, and then there's grace. It was a thing that I got taught early on, and it was mercy equals not receiving the punishment that we deserve, and grace equals receiving the gifts that we don't deserve, or that we didn't earn. And you saying that about faith being God's riches at Christ's expense. So we're not receiving the punishment that we deserve. Jesus accepted that punishment for us.
Amen.
And then we're not receiving the blessings or the gifts that we deserve because we didn't earn them. Jesus earned them for us. We're actually receiving his gifts and his blessings that God would have bestowed on him.
Yeah.
And so that was really interesting. As you was reading that, I kind of connected those dots.
That is a really helpful distinction, because mercy is a companion term of grace that really does help us understand the distinction between those two. And so now we get to the phrase or the phrases related to salvation. Ask Jesus into your heart and give your life to Christ. Two phrases. Once again, these phrases are those that if you're walking into a church on any given Sunday, that these phrases that we're going to highlight during this little mini series on Curious Faith, you're going to hear these phrases, and probably 9 out of 10 people around you are going to be nodding their head like, yeah, I know what that means. But when's the last time we really thought about them? And, maybe some of the phrases that we use aren't necessarily good to use anymore. Or maybe some of the phrases that we use don't really capture what everything's about that it's supposed to be about. And so I think that's why some people have had a little bit of criticism towards the phrase, ask Jesus into your heart, because there is this tendency that we have as human beings to compartmentalize our response to the gospel. Give your life to Christ actually captures more of the fullness of that faith response, right? It's not just that I'm asking him to save one little part of my life. No, I'm asking him to save my entire life. I'm giving my life to him. That's Romans 12:1, is I'm offering my body on that altar as a living sacrifice to say everything's yours, nothing's held back. And I think that's the critique that people have had of the phrase ask Jesus into your heart, because they act like they're just, having one little section of their of who they are that they're giving Jesus. But I think the origin of that phrase, ask Jesus into your heart, came from a evangelistic tract that was put out by, I believe it was the Billy Graham Association, called Four Spiritual Laws. And in that gospel tract, there was this depiction of a throne in your heart, and sin had caused you to put yourself on that throne, so you live for yourself. But Jesus is the only one who is worthy of being on that throne. And so by asking Jesus into your heart, you are rooting, or you're placing Jesus on that throne. And I think this also comes from places like Romans 10, that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So it's not unbiblical, right? So I think the people who are going to critique the phrase just kind of need to slow your roll, right? Don't assume the worst motivation about somebody who's using this, that they're watering down the gospel or something like that. But they're actually rooting it in biblical language. And yet at the same time, if you look at places like Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. So it is more than asking Jesus into your heart, right? There is a lifestyle change that goes along with it. But Dakota, I don't think God would turn somebody away.
No, I think he knows a little bit more than we give him credit for sometimes. And there's actually a really good short story that you shared with me. I think it was by Robert Munger. My Heart's Christ's Home.
That's true. Yeah.
Like, if you really want to encapsulate what that phrase means, like, that's a great short story to go to.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah, asking Jesus into our heart is putting him on the throne. It's making him the center of our operating system in our life, and that is what it means to actually become a Christian, is to give our life to him, trusting in him as our sole object of faith, and receiving that gift of salvation by grace. And so these are really good thoughts so far on this Lost in Translation series here on Curious Faith. And so we appreciate you listening to this episode of Curious Faith. If today's episode has helped you, then share it with a friend who might be asking the same question, or they might need to know these terms that we throw around in the church every so often. And so if you've got a question or a phrase that you'd like featured on a future episode, then email us at questions@curiousfaithpodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. And this podcast is sponsored by Agape Baptist Church. You can learn more about Agape and our outreach ministries through the Community Care Village by visiting our website and seeing how you can get connected. And so until next time, stay curious and keep growing in the faith.